Hey all, Heretic here. Today in the Battlegrounds, we're talking about demons. We're going to talk about all the different minions, trinkets, spells, heroes, you name it. We're going over everything demon. Let's jump right into it. Now, as always, when we talk about a tribe, we're not going to just talk about minions that are just some stats. They have to do something for me to go over them. If it's just a simple battle cry, gain some stats, do this, we might skip them. And again, we might not, so let's wait and see. And if there are ever any changes, if there's a patch and you're like, I wonder how this is going to affect demons, take a look at the comments attached to this video, because I will post there all the changes from the patch and go over anything that might be relevant. If, of course, it needs a complete new video, I will do it, but that's rare mid-season. The first minion we're going to talk about is tier 1, not a demon, but neutral, and only in demonic lobbies, the Wrathweaver. This is a 1/4 after you play a demon. Deal 1 damage to your hero and gain +2/+1. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, because you don't, maybe you've never played demons, you don't like them. Like, well, why would I want this minion? I am just literally doing damage to myself. You're right. If you don't find some of the other minions we'll talk about in a second, he's not very good. You're literally going to be doing damage to yourself, and if you lose any fights, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. But later, you'll see why that damage to yourself is actually important and useful. Jumping up to tier 2, we have the Soul Rewinder. This is a 3/1 demon. After your hero takes damage, rewind it and give this +1 health. Wait, didn't we just say Wrathweaver does damage to us? This rewinds it? What that means is you will take the damage that you get from any abilities that normally would deal you damage from different minion effects and things like the Wrathweaver, and then it will reverse them, and you will see this gain health, and you won't have taken that damage. That can put you to 0 health, and it will not kill you. Picky Eater is a 1/1 demon that has a battle cry that says, consume a random minion in the tavern to gain its stats. This is very simple. There's not much to cover here. Just remember that if you say have 2 minions in the shop, that one has tiny stats and the other one has big stats, and you happen to have the ability to buy that tiny statted one, it might be worth buying a minion you don't really care about, just to guarantee you eat the minion that has the stats that make it worthwhile. Soul Rewinder is one of those minions you definitely need to do most of the builds, and we're going to cover later. Just remember that if you triple it and then you take damage from how you got it, it can kill you. The Rewinder has to be in play. You're going to hear about that when we get to the imposing percussionist later. This is just a reminder that if you have a Rewinder on the board, but you have something that triples it and then it triggers damage, if you are at low enough health, you will die because the Rewinder's not on your board to rewind it. Next up, we have the Impulsive Trickster. This is a 3/3 demon that has Death Rattle. Give this minion's maximum health to another friendly minion. Now, that doesn't sound insane, and you're right, with its base stats, it kind of sucks. But as you buff this during the game, this can get quite nasty. If you give it Taunt, it's going to be able to die first, hopefully, and then move its health around the board. In the early game, it's common for this thing to survive and then just be the last thing on your board and you lose that fight. But later, as you get into the game, the deeper you go and you could buff this, it is very effective. Now, you don't want to do builds built around this for various reasons, but the main one is typically if Quillbore or Elemental are in because of Transmuted Bramble Witch. If this thing's got Taunt and a Bramble Witch runs into it, it's a 3/3, and you're getting no effect for all that gold, battle cries, whatever you sunk into this minion are completely wasted. So be careful how you utilize it. With that being said, there are tricks with things like Monstrous Macaw, where you can trigger this Death Rattle. Titus Revenaire, we can get extra triggers. So even if it doesn't have Taunt, there are lots of ways to move the health around on this thing and make a big difference in your game. Mind Muck is a 3/2 demon that has battle cry, choose a friendly demon. It consumes a minion in the tavern to gain its stats. Now, obviously, if your shop is not buffed at all, that's not really a big deal, right? But in the early game, turn 3, 4, 5, that still makes a difference. You're still putting a minion on the board who is then taking the stats out of the shop and putting them on another minion you have. It's random, you can't control it unless you buy all but that one minion, or if you have a brand, you can trigger it twice. There's not a whole lot of ways you can control what you're going to eat, but if you've buffed the shop at all, especially if this is late game and your shop is buffed off a lot by minions and trinkets, this is a big deal to cycle because it puts a lot of permanent stats on your board. Fiery Fellblood. This is a 2/1 elemental demon. Death Rattle minions in the tavern have +2 attack this game. Obviously, this one is not doing you much favors by it being on your board just sitting there. You need to trigger this as much as possible so you can get the value out of that shop buff, right? The sooner you get this, the better. If you triple into this from tier 2, not the greatest triple, but long-term could be a big deal. If you get to tier 3 and you find this immediately, once again, not bad. You're sitting here on turn 8, 9, don't be buying this unless there's a damn good reason. You know, maybe you have a macaw, maybe you're trying to get some extra triggers out of this so you can buff up that shop a lot. Just make sure that the rest of your board can make up for the fact this minion is so weak, or you can afford to take the damage. Now, Slimy Fellblood is a 3/4 elemental demon that has battle cry. Minions in the tavern have +2 health this game. Well, this one is buffing the health of your shop. Fiery wants attack, Slimy wants health. This is good if you say have a Rylak. If you get an early young Murkai in the still on your board, not a bad use for it, just to buff up that shop a little bit more. Certainly not a bad card at all. Maybe you're lucky and you're sitting there playing Shudderwalk and you're just hitting this thing over and over and over again to buff your shop. Slimy Fellblood, not a bad minion at all when you're in that tier 3 range. False Implicator is a 1/1 demon, which, well, that sounds bad, right? At the end of your turn, consume a minion in the tavern to gain its stats. Obviously, if you are far behind and you are running out of health and the shop is not buffed at all and you get a False Implicator, this is not going to help you. But if you've buffed that shop with that Fiery or that Slimy Fellblood, even a couple times, maybe multiple turns, this can really get big really fast. This is an end of turn effect, so it does stack with Drakari Enchanter, and it can be targeted by Eyes of the Earth Mother, allowing it to become gold and then consume and get double the stats from whatever it eats out of the shop. Depending where you are in your game, there are times when this is one of the most powerful minions in the end game of your board. Sitting on tier 4, we have the Imposing Percussionist. 4/4 demon, battle cry, discover a demon, deal damage to your hero equal to its tier. Now, this one obviously is very good. It's giving you discovered of a demon you want. Unfortunately, if you don't have a Rewinder, it could also be the thing that kills you really fast. You start discovering tier 5 and 6 demons and you don't have a Rewinder, you are taking a ton of damage. So Rewinder is basically a must with this minion in particular. Now, it's a battle cry, you can use it with Bran, you can use it with a Rylak, you can use it with a young Murkai. You can milk a lot of free minions out of this. Once again, just be careful and make sure you have the health to spend the time to milk this. Archimonde is a tier 4 4/5 that reads, after your hero takes damage, rewind it and reduce the cost of your next tavern spell by 1. Now, right off the bat, this is a brand new card I have not played with because it was just announced in a patch. But we're including it in the guide because it should be, and it's pretty obvious to see how it's going to work. This can replace your Rewinder. Now, I don't really think you should have both of these on your board. Yeah, if you've got a bunch of buffed up Rewinders, you might as well keep the Soul Rewinders. But Archimonde is going to give you the same effect with the added benefits of 1, he's higher tier, so he does more damage when you win fights, and 2, it's making spells cheaper. And that is a massive benefit for any build you're playing. I just feel like Archimonde is going to be the perfect fit to sit there, soak up that damage by rewinding it, and then giving you cheaper spells. This will, most of the time, replace your Soul Rewinder, and especially if you can't find one, but you need one, now you've got Archimonde to do it, but better. And at some point during this video, I am going to just say Rewinder, and you're going to be like, does he mean Archimonde or Soul Rewinder? And for those purposes, I mean both. I'm going to put up the image of Archimonde with all of those references, but I'm not going to go back and reshoot and re-edit all that video since the video is basically ready to go when I got the patch information. So just be aware that it's going to happen. Malchezaar, the Prince of Dance. Now this is a 5/4 demon that 2 refreshes each turn, costs health instead of gold. Once again, kind of need a Rewinder to make it work. Nice thing about this is this lets you roll a lot to look for triples, minions you need. You get 2 of these, that's 4 rolls. You triple it, it's 4 rolls. You get 2 triples, it's 8 rolls. It gets a little crazy, and with the right trinket combinations, you really can buff the hell out of your shop. We'll cover those later. But Malchezaar is one of the best ways to find the things you need, as long as you kind of have a Soul Rewinder. At tier 5, we have the Depraved Felfin. Now, this is a 4/3 demon Murloc that is, after you discover a minion, gain stats of the other options. Now, this one is depending on the hero and when you find them. It's kind of hard to fit in most of your boards. If you're just discovering every now and then from spells, get lucky, get a triple, this isn't going to eat a whole lot. But if you have a hero power like Scabs, where you're discovering every turn, or heaven forbid you're a Bigglesworth and you get to get the big discovers and just nom all the stats from those other two minions, makes Felmfin a really big deal in the right situation. Really just depends what you're running. Insatiable ur'zul is a 4/6 demon that has taunt. After you play a demon, consume a minion in the tavern to gain its stats. Now this is what should have been nerfed in the most recent patch for demons, and maybe not Hellbat like it was. ur'zul is the powerhouse. It kind of just grows crazily, especially if you have a brand. If you find imposing percussionists, the more those demons you're cycling, it just nom-noms that shop constantly. The only thing I have to say for sure is be careful of what you buy in what order, because if you eat the minion you really wanted, you might have given up a lot of value. Make sure you're buying first, playing neutral minions first. That way you don't eat those minions you really want. If there's nothing in the shop that you care about and you don't even want to eat those minions, play out those neutrals, then go to other shops to make sure you can find better minions to eat or better minions to buy. And don't forget, the weakness of this minion is that it has taunt. So you either want to have your board heavily taunted to protect it, or tricky trousers played on this. That way it doesn't have taunt itself. The Mirage Conjurer is a 4/4 demon. Choose one. Double the attack of all the minions in the tavern, or double their health. Now, if you buff the shop a whole lot, this thing, of course, is phenomenal. If you haven't buffed the shop a whole lot, maybe wait until you can get a couple of these. Hell, maybe you've got two in your hand and you find the triple in the shop. You just play one, double it. Play the other one, double it. Buy the triple. Now you've got one with a bunch of stats on it if you still want it. And then when you play that, now you can triple the stats. It really can get insane if you can find a triple. It's hard to pull off. They're tier 5. You're not typically going to have that happen. But when you do, it really can make your board massive for whatever minion you're buying. Pilgrim is a 3/5 demon. One demon each turn costs health instead of gold. So this is just important. Make sure you have Soul Rewinder if you have this. Hell, if you are playing a build where you want to cycle demons, it's very nice if you see one of these in the shop and you see another demon you want, but you don't really care about keeping any of them, to buy the Pilgrim for money, to use the Pilgrim's effects to take that other demon out of the shop, sell the Pilgrim, play your other demon, then roll and look for more. You don't have to keep this on your board. You just want to get that one free minion and get all your other triggers going off for your various demon builds. Tichondrius. Now this is a 3/3 demon that reads, after a hero takes damage, give your demons +1/+1. Well, once again, you want a Soul Rewinder, and then you want a bunch of self-damage effects. So you're doing that damage to yourself. The Tichondrius goes, oh, they did damage, buffs all your board, and then your Rewinder goes and reverses the damage, but the buffs stick with you. Tichondrius, if you're doing a self-damage build, which we will cover later in detail, is definitely one of the better engines for this and can cycle you up a lot of stats for your entire board. Jumping up to tier 6, we have Mecha Jaraxxus. Now this is a 3/15 mech demon battlecry. Get a random magnetic demon. This one is just great for cycling, and that is going to be Rusted Reggie, who is a 5/5 mech demon that will give one of your minions Wind Fury. Then you'll have Magnatharian Prime, which is a 1/10, which is taunt and can be magnetized to any of your mechs or demons. And then Baltharak, which is a 5/1, which has Reborn that can be magnetized to any one of your mech and demons. Mecha Jaraxxus does work with Brand, so if you have a Brand, you could sit there and kick out extra copies. If you have the mind to, you can use a Rylak or a Young Murkai to generate extra copies to, say, try farming out triples, or at the very least, just extra magnetics to attach to your demons. Cultist of Sathara is an unusual one. Now this is a 12/13 neutral stealth death rattle. Summon your first demon that died this combat with its maximum stats. The reason why this one is difficult is you have to remember to always check that you are not in a lobby with elementals or Quillborn, because one transmuted Bramble Witch basically makes the minion that it hits useless, and the Cultist of Sathara basically useless, because now it just summons a 3/3. You don't want to summon a 3/3 with the Cultist. You want to summon a 400/400. You want to summon something big and nasty. This does work with all the usual ways to get extra death rattles if you're going to run Tinus Riven there and whatnot, and trying to summon out additional things. But once again, just be careful of the lobby. You can get away with it and just risk it and see if it works, but if your opponent finds that Bramble Witch, basically shuts your cultist down. Famished Fellbat is a 9/6 demon. At the end of your turn, give your other demons consume a minion in the tavern to gain its stats. Now, Famished Fellbat is only useful if you've buffed your shop, really. You eat a bunch of minions in the shop and they're all baseline, 1/1s, 2/2s, 4/4s, who cares? You buff them even a little bit with the right trinkets, abilities, it can be a huge difference in what you're going to be consuming. It does work with Drakari Enchanter and is incredibly effective if you get into the Famished Fellbat portrait, which we'll talk about later. Fellbat, a mainstay of demon builds, and we will cover a lot of them later. Jumping up to tier 7, we have the Champion of Sargeras. Now, this is a 10/10 demon. Minions in the tavern have +10/+10. Now, obviously, if you get this and you're playing demons, you'd prefer to be something that eats the shop. You want to have your Famished Fellbat. You want to cycle Mind Mucks. You want to brand so you can eat more when you play those Mind Mucks. Champion of Sargeras, one of the best ways to buff your shop because it touches the board and it's an instant 10/10. All right, let's talk about the spells we want to find as a demon player. Now, of course, there's all the usuals you've heard. Chef's Choice, Planar Telescope, Lost Staff of Hamul, Hired Hunter, because we want to find battle cries typically. Cycling these kind of spells are going to give us discovery of the minions we're going to use to make our builds work. Hasty Excavation is a great spell when playing demons. It is tier 2, it is 3 gold. Now when I say gold, it's really health, and that means your Soul Rewinder will then go, oh, you took damage? Let me fix that. He will gain health, and then you will gain the spell, which gives you gold. Hasty Excavations is always worth it when playing demons. Staff of Enrichment is an easy play if you're doing any build that says, hey, I want to eat the minions in the shop. It's on tier 3, so you're going to start finding it early. If you already suspect this is the build you're going to do, it doesn't really hurt you if you only buy 1 or maybe 2 of these if you don't end up doing it. But if you do it, this kind of thing does add up a lot over the long term of the game. Channel the Devourer is great. Say you've buffed the shop up a lot, and now you just happen to generate this spell from one of your minions you're cycling, or get it out of the shop at a reduced rate or free because of a trinket you have. Now you can take one of those big minions, spit it out of the shop, and have those stats land on one of your minions. Maybe you've got a demon that's huge, but you don't really want it anymore, and it's a little awkward at being there. Spit it. Just make sure, no matter what, you sell any minions you don't want to get that buff before you spit. Otherwise, you know it's going to land where you least want it. It always does. Corrupted Cupcakes is a tier 5 4 gold spell that is just good if you've buffed the shop up a lot. You sit there, you target one of your minions, it's going to eat 3 of those minions in the shop. Obviously, if there's 4 or 5 minions in the shop and 2 of them are small and you can, maybe buy those minions out first. That way you consume the minions you want and not the tiny minions and waste that spell. Because if it eats 2 of those small ones and only 1 decent one, you're not really getting a big return on your investment. It's worth spending the gold if the minions you're eating are big enough to justify that increase. Say there's 2 enscrolled funguses in the shop and you've cast a lot of spells. There's extra value there you're just not going to get out of a lot of other minions unless you've done a lot of buffing to the shop. Let's jump into the heroes that like demons. Now, these are ones that I find work well for me or work well for other people I have seen playing them with. Not necessarily the end-all be-all, just the ones I like. And we have to start with, well, I just have to for the sake of consistency, Lord Jaraxxus. Lord Jaraxxus' hero power is Blood Fury. It's 1 gold. Choose a friendly minion. It consumes a minion in the tavern to gain its stats. So, you target a demon, it eats a random minion in the shop for 1 gold. In the early game, it's not horrible if it eats the right minion. If it doesn't eat a 1/1 or a 2/2, it's not bad. In the mid game, if you start buffing the shop, it could be good, yeah. In the late game, if you buff the shop, it's great. Otherwise, you're taking Jaraxxus basically because he has high armor. But the downside you risk is, what if you don't find a demon? Yeah, you can have games where you just don't find a demon for the first few turns and you never have a target for this hero power. It's essentially a dead hero power. It works great at lower MMRs. At higher MMR, it just doesn't do anything. No one takes this, but it's fun to see one every now and then. Dino Tamer Bran. Why? Because as the demon player, we're always looking for brands, and if you pick the hero brand, you get Battle Brand as a hero power and passive. After you buy 4 Battlecry minions, get Brand Bronzebeard once per game. That means you get a brand. You just have to buy 4 Battlecries. Now remember, that's not discover. Let's not use a spell to make them. You have to buy them out of the shop. That is important. I do like favoring to do this early, and it is very irritating when someone completes it super fast and you're like turn 4 and, well, I guess I'm taking all this damage because they've got a brand, plus they got the extra battle cries when they bought those minions, because now they have these battle cry minions in their hand and a brand. If they're any kind of tempo, I'm taking a lot of damage. Brand, not amazing, but does the job. Jandis Barov has a fun hero power when you're playing demons, and that is swap, lock, and shop it. And that is swap a friendly non-golden minion with a random one in the tavern. You're like, well, how's that good? I'm throwing one of my minions in the tavern, Heretic. And I'm like, well, what if you buff the shop? And you buy that minion, say it's a picky eater. Play the picky eater. It eats a minion in the shop, right? Well, you hero power the picky eater, it goes back in the shop. And you buy the picky eater and you play it again. And then it eats from the shop again. Now, let's also remember that if you have a brand, you're going to be eating more stats. And that's just two very simple examples. Imagine the value you can get out of percussionists with this hero power. As long as you don't golden them, you can keep cycling it over and over again, and you really can get some big value out of this hero power. Rakara is an interesting hero to play with demons. Their hero power is Glory of Combat. Passive, after a friendly minion kills an enemy, give it +1 attack permanently. Every time one of your demons kills another minion, it gets 1 attack. That's adding up over time. These minions stick around with you usually for quite a while and can just keep scaling that attack. It is not good in the late game, but in that mid-early game really can make the difference, where your demons tend to have high health, but not great attack, and that can give you a big edge. Millhouse Mana Storm. His hero power is Mana Storm. That is passive. Minions and refreshes cost 2 gold. Upgrading the tavern costs 1 more. You're like, well, why Millhouse? I'm like, well, because minions cost 2 gold. And I know the refreshes cost 2 gold, but if you're playing demons, that means you can get a Malcazar or 2 of them, and your rolls are free, because technically they're costing you health, but of course you have a soul rewinder, and so you don't have the problem Millhouse has, where you are running out of gold because you're spending it on rolling. You're typically getting to buy a lot more minions and make it go a lot farther than your average Millhouse board. Demons really work well with Millhouse if you're doing a cycling build as opposed to a shop consumption build, but Millhouse is just fun with demons. Lich Bazil has an interesting hero power with demons, and that is Graveyard Shift. 2 gold, steal a card from the tavern, take damage equal to its tier. You're like, well, how is that good? It's like, yeah, I get more minions for cheaper, but there's more to it than that. Well, first of all, if you have a soul rewinder, you take no damage. So you get 2 gold to buy any minion, and it says card from the tavern, any spell. So in the early game, yeah, it's not as good as one would hope it to be. But when you get to that late game, the spells start costing 4, 5, 6, cost you 2 gold. You just buy it. Oh, I should take 6 damage here, but no, my rewinder takes the damage, gains some health, and everyone's happy. Lich Baz works really well in demon lobbies, and it's really the best way to play them. That way you don't take a ton of damage from the hero power until maybe later in the game when you switch to a different build, you sell the rewinder and you don't really care about your hero power much. And finally, of course, it's Shudderwock. Their hero power is free. It is Snicker Snack. Trigger a friendly minion's battle cry. You got it. All you do, you target one of your minions, their battle cry goes off. Is it something that eats the shop? There's some random stats hitting your board. Is it something that buffs the shop? You've buffed the shop. Oh, is it discovery? Now you're discovering things. It is amazing with a demon board. You really can get whatever you need to be triggered because you just target the right battle cry, and demons have tons of battle cry. If it's an early one for that crazy tempo of a picky eater, or if it's late for percussionist, or if it's that slimy Fellblood and you're buffing the shop more, whatever role you need Shudderwock to do, they just target it for free and go nuts. Shudderwock's great with demons. Let's talk trinkets. Now, there's a lot of different trinkets we could cover. We're going to stick mainly to the demon ones with a couple neutral ones just for the sake of, everything. Now, I don't know if I've been covering these in my guides, and it kind of came to my attention because of how I was searching that I was skipping over these, I think. So let's mention them. Colorful compass. It doesn't matter which one you get. Yes, the graphic is always going to show Naga because that's all the website has available for us. But demons, you want demon compass if you find it. And the lesser and the greater one are both fantastic options if you think you're going to be playing demons for the entirety of the game. Now, when it comes to glowing gauntlet, I'm going to say I don't really care for the lesser. I want the greater. Now, will I take the lesser if it's the best thing offered and I'm getting my ass kicked and I think I'm going to die? Yes. But at least in the case of the glowing gauntlet that's greater, whenever you're eating the shop, that is an instant buff to that shop. That's pretty significant. Obviously, if you're not going to be playing consumption of the shop, it's probably not going to be too good for you. But if you're running a Fellbat, if you have yourself running a couple false implicators, then you really can get some big value out of the glowing gauntlets. Now, Fellblood Portrait, I like a lot in the right scenario. So it depends what hero you're playing. It depends what tribes are in. If you're playing Shudderwock, great instantly. Are Beast in and there's a Rylok you already have on your board? No brainer. Slam this thing down. Have fun. But also, is a Fiery Fellblood in the shop? If you see that already, you could just keep throwing that out there to die every turn. It makes it incredibly worth it. So it really depends what's in the shop and what you can make work depending on your hero power and the tribes. Rewinder Portrait is easy if you already have some demons and you're like, well, I want to do this. It's self-damage. I think I can make it work. Rewinder Portrait is going to give you both a Wrath Weaver and a Soul Rewinder. What if you have a couple demons, but you don't have a Soul Rewinder? Now 6 gold, you get that and a Wrath Weaver to at least enable the self-damage package. Now, is it good enough by itself? Sometimes it can hurt. If you're in a bad place, your hero doesn't give you easy access to discover or some form of tempo. I've had many times where Rewinder Portrait is just too slow. You've already taken a little bit of damage, and then you put this down, and yeah, they scale themselves a hair, but just that. And since it's 6 gold, you only really can get one other minion out of the shop at that point. So you're really not going to gain a lot of tempo no matter what they are. So just be careful. If you're already starting to be in a bad spot, Rewinder Portrait might take too long to get online, unless the shop looks really good and you don't mind sitting on tier 3 for a little while to just gas your board a little bit. For 6 gold, the Eye of Sargeras is every 4th card you buy costs health instead of gold. Well, almost every build we're playing with should have some form of Rewinder, be it Soul or Archimond. And that means we're going to be not taking any damage from any of this stuff. And that means we're going to get minions cheaper. It's phenomenal. The value on this is very good. Compared to some of the other trinkets, yeah, it doesn't quite hold up depending what your build's going for. But if you're cycling a lot, there's nothing wrong with this at all. I feel like this is a perfectly good trinket. Mind you, I haven't played with it at all, but just with how we play demons now, I feel like this is an easy fit. I think 6 gold's a little expensive for it, and I think the price will come down later, but I still think it'll be good. Just once it's at like 3 to 4 gold, it'll fit better, I feel. We'll see. For 3 gold, we have Mecha Jaraxxus sticker. Now this is get 2 random magnetic mecha demons at the start of each turn, get 2 more. Now, I don't know for sure if this is in demons because it just came out, but it seems safe for me to include here because it's Mecha Jaraxxus. It better damn well be in demons. But that's giving you 2 magnetics a turn. If you're playing any cycling build with demons, it's not bad. It's like Colorful Compass. You're getting 2 of them. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. Hell, there's even the potential of you holding for triples with this. I think it'll be a little hard because it's a pool of 3. You need to get 3 copies of one to make a triple. You should know that. But since you're only getting 2 a turn and there's no way to make it come faster, this might be hard to pull off. But if you've got the time in your head and you want to hold on for the triple, say it gives you 2 of the same, now you're feeling like I can be greedy for a turn and wait and see. There's some potential. And if anything, it's still just good for cycling. Darnassus Pie, there's only a greater one now, is interesting. I don't hate it. If you're going to cycle a lot, if you're sitting there and you're already got a brand and you've already got the ability to discover because of your hero power or because what's in your shop already, then Darnassus Pie can be very good the more you cycle. as long as you're also consuming the shop at the same time with the likes of a false implicator. Otherwise, you probably want to stay away from this one. Nether Pendant can be a lot of fun. Requires you to do damage to yourself, and a decent bit of it to scale it up well. So if you don't really have ways to deal damage to yourself, or eat the shop consistently in the form of a false implicator or a fellbat, then you're not really going to get any value out of it. But if you're in a good position, you're already relatively strong, you just need scaling, this will give you scaling. You just need to then start doing that damage to yourself so you can buff up that shop, so now you can start eating it to get massive. Because this does offer you theoretically limitless scaling, which is always good in a game that's going to go long. Fellbat Portrait can be an easy decision right away. It's expensive, and if you haven't buffed your shop at all, it's probably not going to go great for you. But if the shop's been buffed a little bit, or you have time to get that buffing going, Fellbat is going to make it so that shop is always full. Every time you buy a card, another card is instantly going to respawn to fill that spot. If you happen to have a Drakari, you then eat that shop, it will refill the shop before the next minion triggers, giving you more time to consume more minions. You're not just going to eat that one shop, it's going to keep resetting itself and eating. So eventually, even if you're looking at 2 false implicators and a golden Fellbat and a golden Drakari, that shop's just going to keep resetting while you nom the hell out of those stats. It's time to talk countering demons. How do we deal with the demon board as we get to the late game? We're looking at them, they're big stats, they're just scaling very quickly, and they're hard to deal with, but they are a one-trick pony. What they're gonna do is get ridiculously big and then either crush you or die. That's kind of all they can do. Now you can try to outstack them. Maybe you throw on divine shields, maybe you're just scaling pretty well and you're going for it and you're going toe to toe. And maybe you're high rolling more than they are, and that'll work. But we're here to talk about the ones where you can't just go face to face with them. We got to think tricky how to get around them. Now, typically, and not always, but typically, demons will have a massive taunt, be that ur'zul or whatever they're trying to go for. There's going to be some way they have a taunt that you might not be able to get through. And one of the common ways, especially at lower MMR, that they'll win is just having a massive taunt, or 2 or 3 of them, just beasts that you just can't get through. Typically, it's only one. The rest of their board is more built around building that up. And if that's the case, good news for you, we can get around that. So let's say they have a giant taunt. It's all they have. Obviously, we can throw Leroy's at them. Leroy hits it, Leroy dies, they die. End of conversation. You win. Now, if they've only got one big minion and the rest of your board is good, let Leroy do his thing, kill them. Maybe you have to sell something important to put a second Leroy out because they're only really running 2 taunts and just cycle units after that to scale them up. You could be lucky. Also, Sin'dorei straight shots, not bad. Let's say you can't find that Leroy, but you find a Sin'dorei. Well, what you can do at least is strip taunt off that big minion or those couple big minions, and then go hit their backline, hit everything else. Yeah, you can't control where your minions are gonna go, but at least you've made it so there's an option for them to hit targets that are viable now, other than the giant minions that before they would have to go through before they could do anything. Another good example is if they're running Cultists of Sathara and you're looking at a big taunt. Well, you're like, crap, what do I do? The easiest way to deal with this board is a transmuted Bramble Witch. You take their giant taunt, you turn it into a 3/3, now it's the first demon that died, their Cultists of Sathara dies, and oops, it summons out a 3/3, not exactly helping their cause. Maybe they're one of those players who's just not really paying attention, and they have a Cultist, they have their massive minion, you can get through it, but when that Cultist dies, you can't get through it the second time, and you're kind of screwed with that point. But you notice they're not buffing their Cultist at all. Now, it's got stealth, so you can't target it directly, but let's remember you always have Tunnel Blaster. If they're only winning because of that second minion they summon, if you Tunnel Blast him by doing 3 damage to him, even with stealth, he never gets that death rattle, he never gets to do the thing, he just dies. So make sure you keep their base stats of those secondary minions in mind because it might be important on how you get through it. Upper hand is a good way to try dealing with a large demon board. Now this is more effective if they're running a large group of demons that are all pretty big, because at least you're removing one's health completely. Unfortunately, it doesn't help you with the others, and yes, if it hits the wrong minion, you're screwed, but there's only so much you can do on that end. Otherwise, probably the other most effective way, of course, is venom and poison. I don't care what minions you're running, if you throw venom and poison at minions that are in the millions, they still die after they take a single point of damage, rendering those stats essentially meaningless. So if you run enough venom, you don't really have to worry about what their stats are, because you just have to have more of them than they do. If you're running venom, you're probably running murlocs, you can use Baskill, you can summon more toys out of your hand. There's lots of ways you can cheese it and really beat down a big demon board if you have the time and the luck to find them. But let's face it, if a demon board hits a certain scale, you're gonna have a hard time beating it no matter what. That's true of any board though. If you high roll high enough, you should win. Let's talk about builds now. What are we gonna do for the final synergy we want to put together? Obviously, you can't just have a bunch of random minions. They have to do some things together. And we're going to start with the self-damage build. I feel like this one is exceptionally easy. You can start it relatively early and just kind of build it out and see what you're doing. Now, one of the first signs you might want to play this is if you get the lesser Trinket Soul Rewinder portrait. This is not required, but it is a good indication that you might want to do it because it's already obviously pushing you demons. You've got one of the activators in Wrathweaver, and Soul Rewinder is a requirement for basically everything demon. So I think a good start is when you find that trinket. That would make one of the main pieces of this build to be Soul Rewinder and Wrathweaver. Now the Wrathweaver becomes optional the later you go in the game. We'll get to that later, but I would say these are the first two main pieces. And if that portrait gives it to you, all the easier because you get them both at once and you've got your portrait, so you kind of know where you're going to go with it. It's not required. You can fit in any other portrait and still find yourself in this build. There's just so many self-damage demons that it works out really well to start with this coupling, unless you just get lucky and find them in the shop early and you're like, oh, well, this is the best direction. Let's do that. So we've got the Soul Rewinder, we've got the Wrathweaver. Other things we're gonna need to put together to make this build work, I'm gonna say, is gonna be starting with Malchezaar. The reason why Malchezaar is easy, he is gonna give you more rolls. And those rolls are gonna allow you to find the minions and spells and all the different things you need to help that build come together and work out for you. And now for the rest of the build really resides completely at tier 5. You could scale this board up pretty well and do a bunch of things, but it's not till 5 that it really shines, because you're going to find that Tichondrius, that every time you do damage to yourself from playing a demon with the Wrathweaver or rolling with the Malchezaar, is going to buff all of your demons. So a must, if you're going self-damage, you want a Tichondrius to be buffing your board. Next would be Pilgrim. He's going to allow you to get 1 to 2 free minions if he's gold per turn for health instead of gold, which of course does damage, which of course triggers more abilities and gives you more stats overall. So Pilgrim is a great fit if you can triple it early. My only issue with Pilgrim is sometimes that spot gets tough because the board gets pretty full as we add all these minions, and at some point you gotta cut something. That's about the time I usually want to consider cutting Wrathweaver. The reason for that is pretty easy. While everybody else is scaling up because they're demons and all these different abilities triggering your Tichondrius, which is then making him buff all your demons, Wrathweaver doesn't really fit that. He doesn't help you in that way because he's not a demon. So he's only scaling as fast as you can discover and play demons, while everybody else is just scaling because you're doing self-damage. And finally, the last main part of this build, I'm going to say, is Bran Bronzebeard. And why? Well, that's because there's so many death rattles to buff the shop, to consume the shop, to just buff your minions, to discover minions. Bran activates a lot of it. So while he might not scale, if you replace a Wrathweaver with a Bran, you're going to get a lot more value out of your other demons, which is potentially going to be a lot more of a payoff than the Wrathweaver. Obviously, if you're weak, you need to keep that Wrathweaver because the Wrathweaver is going to be huge. Bran is never going to be big. Always going to be that little tiny minion you'll want to put out front to bump shields off things because he's just a 2/4. Who cares? So I would say those are the main parts of the build. Really, I feel like ur'zul is an option, but at the same time, almost a requirement. Now, it doesn't have to be. ur'zul can just sit back there and grow huge, But at the same time, your rest of your board can get pretty big too, just because the Tichondrius is triggering. So you don't have to go ur'zul. But if your shop's been buffed at all while you're doing a lot of these things, ur'zul is going to get really big. So we'll put ur'zul as an option, but almost not an option, because typically you're going to buff that shop. Typically there's going to be so much cycling going on. You're going to keep eating. He is going to be huge and worth the spot on your board. Now, when it comes to the greater trinkets I'm looking at, there's a few that work, and basically anything works, but there's a few that work great. Glowing Gauntlet, of course, is buffing the shop. I consider that one if you have the ur'zul. You're not consuming anything, don't waste your time with it, it's not doing anything. Colorful Compass, giving you 2 demons a turn, means you've got more triggers, which means you've got more scaling buffing, and it's just easier to get triples with this. Nether Pendant is kind of the same way. It's like, oh my god, I've buffed the shop a whole bunch because I've cycled a million things. I've done a bunch of self-damage to myself. Now, I'm going to scale that shop even more for the ur'zuls. So really, it depends what you're going for. Colorful Compass, I'd say, is the most important of all these, just across the board, because of its consistency. It's always giving you demons. The other ones require you to be consuming minions. And if you're not consuming a ton of them, you might not get a whole lot of value. I feel like Fellbat is going to be way too slow on this build, especially where in this scenario, we wouldn't want a Fellbat portrait because we're doing more of a self-damage thing. Those are the minions I like to see that work. This build can get really big across the board, and you can put out a really big ur'zul. And if your opponent is even paying remote attention to what you're doing, Transmuted Bramble Witch is a constant threat to your board. So I would be very careful about going for anything with the Cultists of Sathara. This build isn't really required. Your board's going to be pretty big, but not apocalyptically big. So I really don't feel like it's worth the spot for that minion, since it's not going to scale or do much beyond summon one of your random demons when they die. And if it gets hit by a Bramble Witch, they 2-for-1 you essentially. So don't worry about it. All right, now we're going to talk about the shop consumption build. And that is a build where we basically buff up the shop and then we consume it and we win with big stats. How do we know we're playing this? And let's say you have a couple demons and maybe you just get lucky when the trinkets are offered and it offers you a Fellblood portrait. Now that is going to make it so your slimy Fellbloods and your fiery Fellbloods do each other's buffs. And the more you can cycle slimies, trigger their battle cries, or have fiery die, the bigger your shop gets. So now we've got the baseline. These are the 2 main initial minions you either want to have a lot of or cycling, or that lesser trinket. That way we can get access to them and start doing those triggers. So let's say we have either one of those or both. Next minion we're looking for that is basically going to keep us together and hanging in there is going to be the False Implicator. We're now buffing the shops. We are now getting that stat line to a decent rate, and now the False Implicator can eat that shop. If you're lucky, when you play your slimy Fellbloods, when you get a fiery or 2, you're also going to have that False Implicator just sitting there already buffed themselves and then eating a now buff shop, all the better. What else can make this build better? Well, we're going to need typically either a Soul Rewinder or an Archimond. Why? Because we don't want to take the damage while we're cycling things. Gonna be cycling things because we're going to buff up that shop. So we want to make sure we're not taking any damage. Either one of these minions will do. Archimond, of course, is better because Archimond, every time they rewind, is going to make a spell a little cheaper till free, and that is kind of priceless and always worth taking. Now, everything else really we're going to be needing is going to be at tier 5 and later. What we're looking for is going to be Insatiable ur'zul, because once again, we have buffed the shop and we're continuing to buff the shop. Then every time we play a demon to hopefully buff the shop again, we are now going to be consuming a minion from that shop, and that ur'zul will get massive. So ur'zul we want. Make sure, if possible, taunt everything or Tricky Trousers the ur'zul. That way you don't have to worry about getting sniped by a Leroy or a Bramble Witch or just early Venom. Keep him safe. That way he can do the work for you later. Also, we're going to be looking for Bran Bronzebeard because once again, we are cycling a lot of cards, which means Bran gives us double the value. Bran is a good either taunt minion in the back or a bumper minion out front to knock off Venom and shields from random minions. Now, about this time, we should definitely have our greater trinket. So this will inform what we're going to do going forward. Glowing Gauntlet is great. It's going to buff your shop. Everything you consume out of it or buy out of it is a little bigger. If we happen to get Fellbat portrait, of course, Now we have the ability to eat that shop and then more minions, because there's always going to have a full shop there essentially. So that means when we have our false implicators trigger and our potential multiple fell batch trigger, there's always going to be something for them to eat for all those activations. And that is very important. Since we've already worked on buffing the shop, now we want to eat it as much as possible. Now, if we have a Fellbat portrait, we are also looking for a Drakari enchanter. Reason for that is we're going to have a bunch of demons on our board, and if we've got multiple false implicators, say we had 2 golden implicators and 1 Fellbat, we want to make sure they get to eat and benefit from all those stats. If we don't have the Fellbat portrait, you want to make sure that we have our false implicator to the left of the famished Fellbat. Now, the reason for that is there's never going to be enough minions in the shop to eat them sometimes, because we're going to have, 6 demons on the board. Then Fellbat's going to trigger and eat all of them. But when the false implicator triggers, because it's gold, it's going to give you double stats. So you want to make sure, if you're not going to have enough minions, the implicator, if it's gold, is always the one getting the priority treatment, because it gets double the stats on that eat. So you want to make sure it's getting the better eat, because if you by accident, don't pay attention, you put the famished Fellbat out front to bump, and then it eats first and your implicator doesn't do anything, you feel a little dumb. Trust me, prior experience, I know. Now that's basically the build itself. At this point, you are just cycling as many battle cries as you can, trying to get generated extra demons and extra consumption. And then you're looking for things like Mirage Conjurer, because when you play that, it is going to double the attack or the health of the shop, depending what you need. If possible, this is the kind of card you want to hang on to. Make sure you have 2 of them to play them to get the full value. Because let's say you buff the shop to 50s and you play one, yeah, you can make the attack or the health 100. But if you can then play a second one, it is going to double to 200. And then let's say the triple is in the shop and then you buy and play that, yeah, you're tripling the shop after that. So then when you go to consume it, it gets really crazy. So Mirage Conjurer is a great minion you want to have. You're never going to really know it was on your board because there's no way to trigger it. It's a choose effect. It is not a battle cry. It's not a death rattle. You can only use it that one time. But when you get that full value out of it, it really will make a huge difference, coupled with ur'zul and Fellbat and implicators, where you're just eating a lot of stats. And that's it. That's demons. That's how we build them. That's how we play them. That should be everything you need to know for the basics, at least. There's always alternative builds, weird new combinations that come out every time a new card comes out or a new trinket arrives. We never know what's gonna change, but that covers all the basics. Please, if you have any comments, leave it. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you think I nailed it or if I missed some things. What didn't I put in that you think is really key to the demon build? Because it might be important. Maybe it's something I don't do or know about, and it's always useful. Hell, I learn from these videos too, folks. There's nothing wrong with it. You can always get better. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned a few things. I hope you had a good time. I'll catch you next time. Until then, have a good one. Later.